Thank you everyone for attending, and I'm sure you're looking forward to Peter speaking about the gaming industry. But allow me 1 minute to talk about a few of his accomplishments. So, first of all, Peter is the managing director at Griffin Gaming Partners. They're an early and late stage investment that's focused on video game sector. Prior to Griffin, Peter served as the president of Interactive Ventures, games and digital strategy at Lionsgate, where he stood up their gaming business. He's also the former CEO and co-founder of Nerdist Industries, which is a multi-platform creator of genre and pop culture content, as well as the former co-president of digital strategy at Legendary Entertainment. Nerdist was acquired by Legendary Entertainment in July of 2012. Congratulations on that. Moreover, he also serves as on the board of directors on Network and Super Team Games. He also serves on the Los Angeles Sports and Entertainment Commission board of directors. Among his many investments, he invested in Rovio, which has made Angry Birds, and we all played Angry Birds. So thanks to Peter, we got to play Angry Birds and Angry Birds 2. He led their successful global licensing and merchandising program, which I tell you, it is the gold standard in licensing and merchandising. Peter, you're a titan in the industry. We could talk about your accomplishments all night, and I don't want to bore the audience with that. So let's jump into the questions. I've thought for the last 3 days about a very hard question. So we're going to start with that. What's your favorite game and why?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Let's give it up for Merak Capital, our partners. Woo! You guys stole a lot of my thunder there. I think 90% of you guys who I met earlier on this evening play FIFA. In fact, raise your hand if you don't play FIFA. See, that's what I'm talking about. So you guys take your gaming very, very seriously. In terms of my favorite games, I'm a Call of Duty guy. In fact, the first person within our firm who matriculated to partner within Griffin, we actually met while playing Call of Duty during COVID. That's a longer story, but you know what we learned in the 6 months that we played Call of Duty with him before I even asked him what he did for a living. We learned a great teammate, unbelievable leadership, unbelievable under pressure, and just someone that you like. And so, you know, realizing you could never get that out of a 2-3 hour interview with somebody, it was a fascinating data point for us. But for me, I'm a huge Miyamoto fan. So Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, I'm about halfway through. And then I'm waiting for Call of Duty 3. I have the code, so as soon as I get home, we'll be getting after some COD.
That's great. I love Call of Duty too. So when you look at the gaming industry and you believe a lot in it, but what was your first experience when you played the game and you thought, this is serious?
Well, I think in terms of underwriting, you know, the first investment I ever made in 1998, I was running a very small pledge fund, and we were lucky. We made some great investments. Applied Semantics, which sold to Google, Ask Jeeves, which sold to IAC. But the first investment I ever made was GameSpy Industries. And if you guys don't remember, GameSpy back in the day, if you played games like Doom or Quake or Duke Nukem or Half-Life, really the only way that you could play with other people around the globe was this software crawler that GameSpy powered. So it was that Warren Buffett thesis of invest in those things that you use. And it was of great utility to me. So we invested, and it was a bumpy 4 years. This company almost went out of business 3 or 4 times. Also learned how to be a very value-add, hands-on investor during that time. But the company prevailed, and by the time it ended up selling to IGN and then News Corp, on the back of every game that was PC, it would say GameSpy enabled. It had their stamp and their logo. And that was definitely my aha moment, because leading up to that, when we first underwrote the company, a lot of people were snickering at us, you know, me in particular. You know, why would you never heard of this company? Unless you were a gamer, you really hadn't. And so it also gave me that confidence early on to go with your gut, to deploy, practical application of data points, as a consumer.
That's fantastic. So you've spent a lot of time in the industry, and Saudi is quite interested, but it's a very nascent market. We haven't had a lot of history in terms of gaming here. Why don't we take it from the top and look at some of the historical moments and pivotal moments that shaped the gaming industry from your perspective and led it to where it is today?
Well, there's some of the, demonstrating my master's degree in the obvious. There's some natural migrations from console to PC, right? Because there are still markets, like China, like Brazil, like parts of Eastern Europe that can't afford consoles. So there's very little console penetration. So the ability to be more ambulatory with respect to your IP and exist on multiple platforms. So multi-platforming was absolutely key. I think the social nature of gaming, multiplayer was, pardon the cliche, but it was a game changer. The ability to play with other people. When people talk about the metaverse, quote unquote, and some of the VR application, not an area that we're doing a lot of underwriting in, and one of the reasons is the world has gone completely the opposite direction. Gaming is so very, very social, and that's what's wonderful about it. And if you think some of the numbers that were thrown out earlier, again, stealing some of my thunder with some of these data points, when a third of the world's population plays games for an hour a day. Pre-COVID, gaming was on a 248% growth trajectory over the next decade. During COVID, shot up to about 390, but so much of that was people wanting to connect with other people. And so you had kids who hadn't played Minecraft or Roblox in years, picking those games back up. People like myself, it was Fortnite and it was Call of Duty. And so I think at the end of the day, when you think about this multi-platform, the ability to be ambulatory, on the move with your gaming experience, but most importantly, I think the thing that puts a smile on so many people's faces is the ability to play with your cohort, to play with your peer group, or to compete against people you've never met before, make friends, have relationships, online through, again, these are hundreds, if not thousands of hours that you're engaged as a consumer.
I remember the first time I actually made a friend online, and that was on Halo 2. So gaming actually is the first time I made some friend online, and that was before chats, that's before social media, and I connected with them. They were actually much nicer back in the days. I don't know what happened to kids these days. They're not as nice, but hopefully we'll be making friends in gaming as well. So as you said, the gaming industry has morphed into a giant, right? Can you provide some perspective into the current size and what the future looks like for gaming?
Again, some of these data points were shared earlier, and they're gobsmacking. Again, this is you call it a nascent market, but the level of sophistication here is very over-indexed, as is the passion as consumers. But it is on par with enterprise software, and that's excluding hardware and advertising, right? So that's usually a jaw-dropper for a lot of folks. And the unique dynamics around gaming, there's this perception that it's a hits-driven business. It's really not, if you know what to look for. And we as a firm, for example, we see 2,700 plus qualified deals every year. And we break them down into genre, platform, geography, demographic, stage of financing. You couple that to 20 years of a database. One of my partners is the #1 advisor banker in the world in gaming. And so he's been a part of 2 of the largest transactions ever. Tencent's acquisition of Supercell, more recently Take-Two's acquisition of Zynga. And so the data that we have access through these multiple touch points, decades of a database, and the kind of deal flow that we see, you go into that content investing armed with a tremendous amount of data and KPIs, unlike any other form of media. If you were in the film industry or the television industry or publishing or music, you would kill to have the kind of KPIs and data that we have in the gaming industry if you know what to look for. And that's where I think less sophisticated investors in gaming get burned, because they don't know what to look for. They don't really understand what it is that they're looking at. But for us, that's so wildly compelling, and having decades of a track record to line up against that is also helpful.
So I want to touch on that. When I play games as a consumer, it's super easy for me to say, this game is great or it's not so great. But as an investor, what are some of the things that you look at and say, these could be potentially successful gaming companies? What are some of the metrics, if you may share some of them?
Sure. I mean, it starts with the team. So, you know, we've got a couple of our entrepreneurs out here this evening. That's the easiest thing for us to triangulate. When you've been doing this as long as we have, you can triangulate and cross-reference on any founder. You guys would be amazed at how many, you know, people will spin out of an environment like a Riot or a Blizzard or a Ubisoft and take credit for things that they weren't within 10 miles of pushing into the public as a consumable product. So it starts with the team. You want to see vision. You want to see passion. You also need to understand antiseptically, is this a form factor that the market is in want and need for? And that's something where you have to have founders that can park their ego at the door. And that's something that we look for. You know, 1,000% commitment. I think for me, the biggest turnoff as an investor is someone who says, oh, I'm doing this with 90% of my time. You know, my team knows the minute that comes out, I'm done, right? You need to be the throat to choke as an entrepreneur. And then secondarily, you know, some of the data points, I'm not going to give away all of our secret sauce.
Come on, please do.
But, you know, we do look for things like the engagement and early on, whether it's day 1 or day 7 or day 30 or day 60. But more importantly, we also look at things like, well, what is the genre or the subgenre? In what geographies do we think that game will thrive? And as importantly, you know, a firm such as ours, we have about 35 to 40 of the world's larger gaming media technology companies as partners, as investors. And we're able to leverage that on behalf of our founders and our entrepreneurs. And so we look at where the game currently is, and then we do the calculus and figure out, well, if we can help them get into the following markets, if we can find interesting strategic, commercial, tactical partners in those markets, well, then we know the enterprise value is going to go up. And so it's a combination of that quality of the team, the form factor, the vision, the passion. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got the deepest analytical bench out there. It's all about the data. It's all about, you know, the KPIs. And I think, again, over the last several decades, that's where more generalist firms or firms who don't have that depth, the analytical depth, you know, tend to trip up.
So allow me to ask you this question, which is about KPIs. And I'm sure I don't want to dive into proprietary material, but many investors and many gaming enthusiasts who are looking to start their companies, they're looking at some few data points such as maybe retention, maybe activation. What are some of those high-level metrics that you should be looking at when you're evaluating starting your company or when you're looking at an investment from the numbers side? And please, I know you have access to some amazing data and amazing historical data that many people don't, but some high-level KPIs that would be beneficial.
We definitely look at, you know, how is the onboarding of the title, the customer acquisition costs, because you can massage some of those numbers, and we've seen that in the past. And so for us, again, I think relative to the amount of deal flow that we see and the sophistication analytically that we've got, you know, it's my team of analysts that are often beating back my enthusiasm for a deal. You know, I'm the serial entrepreneur operator in the partnership, so I can walk in and I can, you know, look in an entrepreneur's eyes and get fired up, and then it's my analyst will come back and say, well, here are the 17 reasons why we're not going to invest in this company. And that checks and balances is something that's key. But certainly, you know, the CAC to LTV ratio, and then some of it really is about parsing, you know, wherein lies an opportunity for this business, whether that's geographically, demographically, you know, are there other form factors where we can help the game migrate or adapt into, and other partnerships that can be put in place.
Great. And what kind of advice that you would give to some of the VCs or investors who are looking at investing potentially in the gaming industry, and they're looking at starting that practice, including probably many of the attendees? And I'm pretty sure they're interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
You know, I think the first time I came to your offices, right, we were scheduled to have like an hour meeting or a 45-minute meeting, and we ended up staying an hour and a half. We were all, you know, talking about what our favorite games were, and then we took a deep dive into the industry. And we walked you through our overview and our orientation, and you walked me through some of yours. And I think having as many of those conversations as possible is incredibly important. What this market is doing that I've never seen before is pulling, there's a gravity to this market, and you're putting on the right quality of events where people want to be here to exchange ideas. And you couple that to a region and a market in the kingdom where you guys are sophisticated investors, right? So if you couple that discipline and the acumen to the passion, His Royal Highness, he's a gamer. He's an anime manga fan, and he's a gamer. And we know he loves his Devil May Cry, and right, the other titles that that he's known for playing. That helps when you have that enthusiasm from the top down. That is something that can be a catalyst. And when you talk about these, again, gobsmacking numbers of 70% of the population under the age of 30, 70-ish% of the population having a strong affinity for gaming, you don't see those types of numbers elsewhere. So I do think it's a combination of coupling the financial discipline and grounding yourself in that first and foremost. You can't romanticize gaming, and we've seen this happen time, and I talk about this a lot, tourist capital. There was so much tourist capital that poured into gaming over the last decade. For us, it was frustrating in years like 2021 because these valuations were getting driven up artificially, and we had a lot of soul-searching moments determining are we missing something, and we walked away from a ton of these opportunities. Now that the market has kind of come back down, the best founders and entrepreneurs, they want long-term, strategic, smart, value-add capital, and we are that. That's what we do. It's probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest differentiators for us. So I think it's that grounding in discipline, figuring out what is your differentiation, how can you help, and I think here it's obvious. You guys are a gateway to a variety of different markets, but there's also not a market like this where there is this level of passion and enthusiasm. It's something that we've not yet seen.
And that's fantastic. I remember when I first started investing in startups overall, the first question many LPs are asking, where are the exits? I don't see exits. And I'm sure in gaming, the whole industry has changed a lot. Yeah. When we spoke earlier, you mentioned that there were few acquirers, mainly a few that are well-known names. I'm not gonna steal your thunder anymore. So what changed in the financing side in terms of acquisitions? How did we get here?
Yeah, it's, the gaming and the demographics around it, it's the most attractive and the most elusive demographics within the global media ecosystem. So if you talk to any of the advertising holding companies, the WPPs, the IPGs, the Unilevers, the P&Gs, they're dying to get a hold of this consuming constituency. When you look at a decade ago, maybe 12, 15 years ago, there were very few IPOs. It was the endemics, right? You had the EAs and the Activisions and the Ubisofts and the Sonys and the Microsofts, if you will, as some of the major actors in the theater. But the landscape has changed dramatically, a lot of that driven by mobile, a lot of that driven by cross-platform. So if you look at the still fronts of the world and the EG7s and the Embracers, and now you have Microsoft, digesting the Activision acquisition, right? You have Netflix, who bought their 7th game studio, right? Wow. Netflix. The CEO of Netflix said on an analyst call 2 years ago, it is not HBO Max or Disney Plus that keeps me up at night, it is Fortnite. And that 7th studio they bought, actually me and my partner Phil, who hopefully he's here from the airport, he's on his way, but we were 2 of the earlier investors in that company, Next Games out of Helsinki, and actually the 2 big pieces of IP they have were The Walking Dead and Stranger Things, both of which I brought them as partnerships. But these are some of the unique dynamics that we're seeing. And then if you think about, okay, well, who prospectively could be added to that ring of buyers? Because the M&A has gotten so very compelling. Well, the telcos. So if you think of the fact that 80% of all spend on mobile platforms is spent on gaming, Well, right now, the telcos are just big, fat, dumb pipes, right? They're delivering this experience to the user, and they're not making much along the way. You know, you've got Google taking their piece of the action, and you've got Apple taking their piece of the action. So all of a sudden, you're going to have telcos around the globe, and you know, we've got some telcos as LPs, and that's a fascinating conversation because most telcos, culturally, A, they're the size of a small country, and B, you know, they don't have the DNA to be entrepreneurial, but they're going to have to get out of their own way. You now have rumors out there, I'm not telling you anything you can't read, of, you know, Disney looking at EA, right? And that rumor's been floating around for 20 years. At one point, it was EA looking at Disney. You know, now you have Disney looking at EA. But if you think about where the puck is going, and we get asked this question a lot, and I've spent my entire career at this intersection of gaming and media, the #1 show on a streaming platform globally right now is The Last of Us, based on a game. Last year, the #1 show on a streaming platform was The Witcher, based on a game. Gran Turismo, #1 film at the box office. Pre-Barbie, what was the #1 film at the box office? Super Mario. So, you know, I'm someone who helped bring Fallout to Amazon, which hopefully you'll be able to enjoy next year. Borderlands to Lionsgate, and CBS acquired Candy Crush to make into an unwatchable game show. It's terrible, don't Google it. It's really bad. But the point is, that is where, you know, the puck is going. So that when we think about this outer ring of the pie of prospective and potential acquirers, it's growing exponentially. And then if you think about the exploration of the public markets, you know, everybody's keen to see what's going to happen with Discord and with Epic as the market opens up, and there's more of that to come.
And that's fantastic. You mentioned at the beginning the changing of the demographics. And honestly, when I was a kid, my mom used to yell at me all the time for playing games. It was, whenever I touched the controller, she would yell at me and tell me to get out the house, play. And today, she's the one who's playing games all day. So how has that changed? Like, we're not kids anymore who play games. There are old people. There are everybody, every single age.
What does your mom play?
She plays Candy Crush.
What level is she on, do you know? Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. If you 10, 12 years ago, right, it was 90% male. You had 1.4 billion gamers, right around that number at the time. Today, it's 50% male, 50% female. Average age of the gamers around 34. Again, so much of that is driven by mobile. And if you look at the emerging markets like the Indian subcontinent, Middle East, North Africa, Africa proper, parts of Latin America, you know, hotspots like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, mobile's just a huge driver. And again, it's that female cohort, you know, who's oftentimes controlling the budget within the household as well. So, you know, that's a massive shift in demographic. We actually spend a lot more than the average in venture backing female founders, not because socially it's the right thing to do. It is where the industry is going. You know, Rina Onur, who's one of the female founders we backed out of Turkey. Rina was the co-founder of Peak Games, which sold to Zynga for $1.8 billion. And her current company, Spike, is on an incredible trajectory in mobile gaming. So again, a lot of this is parsing through the data. Again, kind of parking your ego at the door and taking a contemplative approach as we gauge what we're going to do in the short, medium, and long term as an industry. But the demographics are, you know, I mean, it should be scary if you're an employer of a lot of people when you think about 1/3 of the world's population plays for an hour a day, because that means you're probably subsidizing that playtime. Unless you're a gaming fund, and then it's actually part of your remit.
That I tell my colleagues because we've been playing games all day, and I've been telling them it's for research.
It is. It's R&D.
So there are a lot of the attendees here today that are ecosystem enthusiasts. They've built the software ecosystem, and I'm sure the gaming industry ecosystem needs something quite different. What are some of the tips that you would look at when you're building a nascent ecosystem and you want to be a global powerhouse?
Well, I think it's, you know, this notion of not invented here, thankfully in gaming, is something that, you know, is very much in the rearview mirror. People have realized that it takes a village. It's going to take a variety of different constituencies to help put together a successful title. And so you don't have to necessarily build your product from soup to nuts. There are partnerships out there for you to explore And so when we think about, a lot of the discussion today, and I know a lot of the discussion over the next 3 or 4 days is going to be about ML and AI, and that's, wildly compelling to someone in our position, right? Because it's going to mean, faster development cycles, better access to efficient and replicable data. It will mean potentially disintermediation of some jobs, so that's obviously a sensitivity, but we can't run away from where the technology is going. I think the gaming industry, because for so long it was regarded as, oh, this is a cute little thing, and now that it is larger than film, publishing, music combined, not necessarily a benevolent king up here, but I think we have learned lessons from these other parts of the media ecosystem who have tripped over themselves time and time again. I mean, the music industry, but for touring and the streaming platforms, was dead, right? Because, everybody was ripping the music and, putting it online, and that's how it was being consumed. And it was a very challenging moment. Similarly with film, theater attendance is down dramatically, and no one has figured out a way to fix that. And a lot of that is because the demographics, as most people who are parents or uncles or neighbors found out during COVID, kids are either playing games or they're watching other people play games. Last year, there was more people watched people play games than watched Netflix by 2x. So, again, I'm just throwing out these statistics which are gobsmacking.
Actually, I stopped watching Netflix and I just play games.
Good boy.
So when it comes to the history of the region, especially the lore, and we spoke briefly about 1001 Nights, which is called in Arabic Alf Layla wa Layla. How come we haven't seen this rich history formed into gaming? I know it hasn't happened in film or other industries, but I believe gaming has a massive potential. How can we utilize the richness of the culture here?
So I spoke passionately with you guys about this, and I talk a lot about this with my friends at NBC and others. One of the things that happens in gaming, we've seen a ton of titles coming out of Northern Europe, and they're wonderful, the Witcher type, Vikings. We see a lot of the Western genre of Red Dead Redemption and Grand Theft Auto. We see a lot of the dystopian mech content that comes out of Japan, and it's unbelievable to play, don't get me wrong. But the fact that we have lore out of this region that is untapped, I see that as an opportunity, not a liability. And I think one of the things that the kingdom should strive for is having local teams work on adapting that lore into interactive storytelling. And what's mission critical there is to not only acquire businesses, like Scopely, thank you, that was a portfolio company of ours, but just a brilliant business, and some of the others within the portfolio. And that's a great top-down strategy, but you've also got to do it bottom-up. And I teach a gaming course at the University of Southern California, and I've talked to some of the cultural ministers around the region, but getting more interactive software curriculum at university is mission critical. We have to have kids see a path to a career. And that could be at any touch point along the way. But once that starts to happen, and people feel they have the confidence and they've got the legs beneath them, and they're proud of that lore, there's a story, I visited a family in the region on my last visit, and they had a daughter, and I think she was 16 or 17 years old, and rabid gamer, and I'm talking, hardcore, really indie horror titles on Steam, very intense. And she came out, and we had a conversation. I actually helped get her an internship at a local developer, and she said, I want to play games where more people look like me. And I thought that was such a poignant comment. And I think to have that curriculum introduced to empower, at the same time have the resources brought in where people have done this before, so they can help educate, and they can help put those foundational blocks in place. That's a very exciting and dynamic combination. When you can then have the resources behind it, that the kingdom and His Royal Highness are deploying against it, like that feels like a recipe for success.
And I believe there's a lot of stories that we can tell to the world from Saudi, from the region. So let's shift a bit to the cultural influences and look at, you've mentioned a bit about your history and gaming entertainment industry. And in my opinion, I think gaming is going to be the entertainment industry in a few years. How do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I kind of jumped on that earlier with the last answer. But I think it's worth double clicking on a little bit because I could not agree with you more. When you think about Hogwarts Legacy in its first week when it shipped, it did 800 million in revenue, far eclipsing what any of the films were able to do at the box office. You know, when I put John Wick into the game Fortnite, so I put that deal in place, the week before John Wick 2 was in the theaters, because of that partnership, there was 400 million hours of gameplay with that character, which probably contributed 30 to 40 million dollars of top-line gross revenue to Lionsgate, the film studio. That's just incredible. And so there's no, if you look, the only studio that's activated against this successfully is Warner Brothers. David Haddad, who runs that group, is a phenomenal executive. And if you look at post the acquisition of Warner Brothers by Discovery, the only senior member of the leadership team that remains in place is David Haddad. And so that happened because Kevin Tsujihara, who was running the studio at the time, empowered him, you know, kept the politics out of it and allowed for him to build a thriving studio and acquire, I think, 10 or 11 assets along the way. So you will see big media acquiring games businesses or vice versa. You will see games businesses acquire studios that own and control vast amounts of intellectual property. It's inevitable.
So thank you for that. And we're just about to wrap up. I have a couple of questions here. I've been looking at the Vision Pro and the Apple device. Meta has spent billions and billions building their own VR, and they're looking to build virtual worlds, which are gaming basically like Roblox. How do you see these emerging trends impacting the gaming industry in the future?
Okay, so how many of you out here own VR hardware? Raise your hand. Okay, it's a really small percentage. How many of you, raising your hand, have used it in the last month? Okay, you're all making my point. So to us, VR is not yet where it needs to be. It is not commercially viable in gaming. I'm not saying it's not going to be there in telemedicine or e-learning or tourism or real estate, right? Some of those applications practically make a lot of sense. But the world is not going to be Ready Player One anytime soon. People are not strapping hardware onto their face to enjoy an experience. The world has gone completely the opposite way, which is great. It's just incredibly social, and gaming is just incredibly social. So I think Meta is going to write down a ton, if not all, of what they have invested thus far into VR. They had no business being in the hardware business anyway. A lesson learned. These companies can afford that type of R&D, but for us, it has to be avoiding the shiny toy syndrome. You know, today's announcement of the World Cup, breathtaking. And competitive gaming and the consumption of competitive gaming is on an incredible, growth trajectory. But there are elements of esports that still are challenging in terms of being underwritable. But that's where a market like this, where you can afford to invest in market growth versus ROI in order to feed the ecosystem, is mission critical.
And one final question, which is, what's your advice for founders and entrepreneurs who are looking to build their own gaming companies? I'm sure there are a few here, and a few are looking to hear your advice on that.
Yeah, it's just to reiterate what I have already said. The having a vision, having passion, truly being able to park your ego at the door and understand, is this a form factor where there's a want and a need in the marketplace? But probably as important is being ambulatory and knowing that before your product is going to see the light of day, more than likely you're going to have to pivot 18 ways to Wednesday, as the expression goes. And having the kind of DNA that will allow for you to do that. Supercell is just a great example of that. If games didn't hit exact KPIs and in a very disciplined manner, they will put it on the shelf. And they really set the standard for the industry. And I think for founders, that is key. And for us as investors, it's about communication. The good thing about being in this industry for as long as we have, having the track records that we do and the networks that we have, we pretty much know, who it is that we're getting into business with. So, that's important as well, because chemically, you're going to be in a relationship for a while, kind of like a marriage. So you better make sure you want to be on that journey together.
Thank you so much. I believe we have some time for the audience for any questions that they may have. So, do we have that time? Okay. Could you please get the mic to that side?
Hello. Firstly, sorry, is it? Yeah. Firstly, hi. Thanks a lot for making the time to be with us here today, and thanks a lot for sharing with us about your achievements and your insights in the industry. I had a question regarding, so for example, new studios that are starting up with a specific game development software, such as Unity, and the controversy that happened in Unity recently with regards to the revenue sharing and so on. What are your thoughts on people who are starting off with software such as Unity and then suddenly have to reconsider and evaluate their decision? And what are some of the things that they could do from an investment perspective, from how it might affect their game development and how that would affect their launch and stuff and so on from the future towards the future?
Yeah, I mean, some of it again is making sure that you're not developing in a vacuum, and it's talking to as many people in the ecosystem that you're going to serve as possible, and whether that's the end user or whether that's software partners or prospective partners, having that very transparent dialogue and being able to take the feedback is mission critical. There are lots of Unity-like stories over the years, and kind of making a unilateral decision in gaming can be tough. It's a very vocal community. Just go on Discord, and they're not shy about that. And so taking that feedback on Reddit and Discord and wherever you can find it, again, that just comes down to kind of being self-aware. Some of this is kind of 101 management, but, and listening to those around you on the team and making sure, that you've empowered those who are going to be making those decisions to go out there and kind of scour the community and make sure that they're doing what's both in the best interests of the company, but also of that end user.
Thanks a lot.
Please raise your hand if you have any questions as well.
We have one more here.
Peter, I'm sure you saw the Xbox leaks and Phil Spencer's article, Phil Spencer's email about AAA publishers and the leading kind of franchises. And basically, in a nutshell, his thesis was that the AAA developers have kind of lost the edge because they don't control the distribution. How do you see this playing out? Do you see us seeing a world of a winner take most, where the big franchises continue to dominate financially, or do you see it, kind of being more thousand flowers bloom kind of environment in the future?
Yeah, the string of pearls thesis, right? So 1,000 flowers blooming, if you will. I'm just as an end user, I'm so excited, that Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond are now going to be in charge of those franchises. We all know, and we've read about some of the toxicity that has existed at Blizzard, Activision over the years. It's no secret, and so I think they're two of the smartest people in gaming. It's certainly in the United States. I think they're going to do wonderful things with these franchises, but I don't think they're getting into this business to be a winner takes all, if you will. For them, if you look at the, Stadia, which Google launched, obviously, not succeeding, didn't prevail with the and they'll be back, by the way, when you know that 80% of their mobile revenue is from gaming. They'll be back. But I think we are going to see a proliferation of kind of a bottom-up, top-down approach, because if cloud gaming, does prevail, if there are consumable products at scale, they're going to have to be similar to the television streaming services. If you as a customer go to that service, I better be able to find what I want, because customer acquisition costs are really expensive. Reacquisition costs are prohibitive. So I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with the content offering. I'm optimistic, but I'm ever the optimist. I'm the consumer.
I believe we have one more question.
Good afternoon. I'd like to ask you a question in regards to your company's investments portfolios, in specific blockchain-based investments and the gaming blockchain-based investments. I looked at investments such as Aptos, Layer 1, and Polygon, which is a Layer 2. And you have a wide list of different gaming blockchain-based investments. Are you optimistic in this regards, given this in general, and what you see going forward? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to go discreetly into any one particular portfolio company. We are, we have a small basket of what we call kind of Web 2.5, Web 3 investments. Relative to our portfolio, it's small, but we remain very bullish on elements of Web 2.5 in particular. As someone who plays Call of Duty, and we've talked about this a lot today with my friends out there who play EAFC, we can't call it FIFA anymore, sorry. The fact that we can't buy, sell, and trade goods is insane, right? And the fact that the publishers haven't yet figured out a way to make money along the way, that is a problem that Web 2.5, Web 3 can address. And we know that A, it will lead to a significant new source of revenue, but B, it will lead to engagement metrics the likes of which they've never seen. So we're really bullish on the infrastructure plays relative to what Web 2.5, Web 3 can and will bring. What is the timeline? I don't know. The stuff that we stayed away from, the hype cycle of NFT marketplaces, for example, self-commoditizing races to the bottom. No interest in that. The speculative stuff in Web 3, the Axie Infinity-like stuff, we've stayed away from day one. We're not speculators. I can't tell you how many times we were pitched games at the height of the Web 3 hype cycle where we would start texting each other like, is it me or has this person not mentioned anything fun in 45 minutes? And at the end of the day, if you're making a game, it better be fun. And if we don't feel that, and there was a lot of that we saw during that window in time. So we're actually, what they're calling the crypto winter, which I think is thawing. It was a very good thing for gaming because I think those that are left standing, they're passionate about their game product. And they also do understand what having that persistent identity, what removing that friction from the economy can mean. And you're going to see some of that happen. You had Forte just announce a recent partnership with Take-Two and Zynga. There's going to be 2 or 3 more of those in the next couple of quarters from major infrastructure players within the industry. So we're excited about it, but you don't need to be first through the wall on a lot of it. And that hype cycle hurt a lot of folks. Fortunately for us, those were the investments that we stayed away from.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. First, thank you, Peter, and thanks for the interviewer. And thank goes to Merak also. I do have a question that you did not tap into maybe in depth, which is the AR and VR. As an entrepreneur and as a gamer, I'm betting on the future, and I do believe that it will be taking much of part of the future. So what could be the challenges that will face that technology maybe in the upcoming 10 years or 5 years? What piece of advice that you could give to someone who thinks of that this is an emerging technology, and I do bet on it currently? And I know your opinion already about it, but that's maybe currently. What about the future?
Look, no one wants it to be more viable than us because it expands the TAM. So the minute it becomes viable, that's a good thing for us. It means growth in the industry. It means more thriving developers and publishers. There was a moment in time where 65% of developers were developing for VR, game developers, who pivoted to their resources to develop in VR, alongside what it was that they were more traditionally developing. So don't get me wrong, just as someone who underwrites, I've got to be responsible. I'm a fiduciary. My responsibility is to my LPs. I don't have the luxury of investing for market growth versus ROI. I think the things that it is currently that VR is missing, it's not social. So again, strapping something onto your face, a piece of hardware, I don't care if you're engaging with other people, you're still having an isolated experience. Repeatability. is something that they haven't yet figured out. Why is it that people don't go back and play these games over and over and over again? I do think the two things are tethered. People like to play games socially, even if it's a leaderboard interaction, or they can multitask because they don't, again, have a piece of hardware strapped onto their face. I think, thirdly, there are still people who aren't comfortable. There's still a nauseous effect with a lot of the hardware, so it has a while to go. And for folks that were looking at VR, even in the late 90s, it hasn't progressed all that much. And so we're waiting for that breakthrough moment. No one is cheerleading for it more than our firm. Believe you me. We just have to be responsible underwriters along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
I believe we also have another question over there.
Maybe one
Do you
more.
have a question, Dr. Nabil? Okay, let's please. Yeah. لا لا لك يا دكتور بس.
الله يعطيكم العافية. Peter, actually, I'm curious what not to do in building a thriving ecosystem for the e-gaming industry or the gaming industry. Based on your experiences in many regions and countries, I think there are things we shouldn't be doing in Saudi Arabia to make sure that we're building a thriving, industry related to the gaming sector.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are so uniquely positioned because of all the things that we have talked about, and I've been talking about for now, I think my 7th or 8th trip here. It's just the confluence of positive data points that you're working with the demographics, the leadership of this country, the passion, the vision. I also think, again, the quality of these types of events that you guys put on time and time again throughout the year, it brings, brain power to the region. I think I brought it up earlier, I think the mistake would be not also working for the solve from the bottom up. And I think you've got to inspire that next generation to get their hands dirty in building product, whether that's software, whether that's hardware, picks and shovels, whether that's marketing, whether that's covering the industry from a media orientation. I don't care. But you've got to inspire these next generations to want to be building from the market, from the region. They shouldn't have to leave the region to go to university to learn how to have a career in interactive software. And that's something I'm really passionate about and would love to talk to more people about, because that's the game changer, right? And I think there are markets that have tried to buy their way into media, different verticals in media over the years, and they always get burned because if you're just buying, you're not learning, right? It's like starting in the mailroom of a company and understanding, how the sausage is actually made. It's just so important. So I think that to me would be, the biggest mistake would be not to inspire these generations to get their hands dirty, to want to have that career, not just as an underwriter or an acquirer, but a builder.
And I believe we have one final question, and we can wrap up.
One question, Ahmed. I want to ask him, after launch of the games, what's the most pains in their operations?
I'm sorry?
What's the most pains you have it in your operation after the game launched as a company?
So what are some of the problems that you face in operations?
Yeah, again, I touched on some of this, but I think it's being consumed with your original vision and not digesting the feedback that you're getting from the market is something we've seen time and time again. You see founders that get consumed with their original vision and they're not able to pivot the business. That can be really dangerous. And sometimes you get fooled and they're, say, of course, if I digest this data and you practically put the data set in front of me, well, of course I'm going to move the business to the right or to the left. But at times they don't. And I think, that can be a huge pitfall. And also, I spoke to it earlier, you don't have to build everything soup to nuts yourself. So much of what you need these days is off the shelf, where you can find in partnership with a third party. And I think, again, that's something that the industry didn't necessarily have at its fingertips 15, 20 years ago, but now that's readily available. So making sure that you're not so myopic in your focus but you're lifting your head up and looking at, well, who could be prospective partners? Who could help us go, 1 + 1 = 4 or 5?
Thank you, Peter. You're an absolute titan of the industry, and it's a pleasure talking to you tonight. Please give Peter a round of applause.
Shukran, everybody. Thank you.
And we're going to still be around to network for an hour or so, I guess.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. You killed it. That was amazing. Thank you.